Welcome back to lesson 3 of our journey through Psalms 1 to 50. In this lesson, we're reflecting on what the Psalms teach us about praying for our enemies. I love and admire the moment in the 2008 US election when Senator John McCain stood up for his rival, the then Senator Barack Obama, at a rally. I remember someone was being derogatory and very misinformed about Obama. McCain and Obama were battling for the most powerful office in the world. Yet McCain was still willing to say to that person, "No, ma'am, you're wrong, he's a good man." And in that sense, McCain stood up for his enemy. Politics were briefly forgotten in that moment, and simple honesty and kindness took center stage. In the Bible, the concept of friends and enemies is linked to the idea of covenant. Friends are those who have an agreement of trust, like an alliance. You may remember that after God's covenant was established with Abraham, he was called the friend of God. And Jesus, after sharing the bread and wine with his disciples, said, "No longer do I call you servants, instead I call you friends." Even in our culture, although we don't necessarily make a covenant of friendship, we have an understanding that our friends are on our side. We expect them to believe us, trust us, and stand up for us when we are opposed. We want to be able to share personal things with them and know that it won't go any further. Friends have our back. It's easy to love and support people like that. But we've all had people in our lives who are not on our side. They oppose us, attack us, and do their best to bring us down. These are the people we're going to talk about today. Enemies. We talked last time about our spiritual enemies, the world, the flesh, and the devil. This time we're thinking about actual people who stand against us, human enemies. They may be family members we've fallen out with, acquaintances who oppose our Christian faith, colleagues we don't get on with, an ex-spouse, or someone who just rubs us up the wrong way. What should our attitude and behavior be towards them? Today's lesson is all about exploring where standing up for and loving our enemies begins, in our hearts before God. It is in the arena of prayer that we can discover what it is to be kind to anyone God puts in our path, just as he is kind and merciful to us. I hope you find today's lesson helpful as we explore more about what it means to love our enemies. Once you've worked through the questions, press play on the video again, and I'll share a bit more about what we learned here at our Daily Bread Ministries from Psalms 9 to 15. Paul makes a striking statement in Ephesians 6. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of evil. That means our fight is never against actual human beings. Our real battle is against our spiritual enemies. That may be a bit hard to stomach if you've been on the receiving end of abuse or betrayal. But understanding this truth can be liberating. It saves us from fighting against people and enables us to obey Jesus' command to love our enemies. Jesus lived that way. We can too. The key thing to remember that God is our friend. He has our back. Like David, who wrote these Psalms, we can always call on God for help when people hurt and oppose us, because we are in a covenant with God. We can entrust the battle to him. He is more than able to deal with our enemies. Our job is to love. But how can we love people who hate us? The Bible breaks it down for us. Luke 6 says, "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you." In Romans 12, we are told, "Bless those who persecute you. And if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink." In Matthew 5, Jesus said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Do good to them, bless them, feed them, give them a drink. Pray for them. These are all very practical things. Love in the Bible is never just a feeling. It always involves an action. God so loved that he gave. It's always self-sacrificial. Perhaps especially when it's someone who isn't easy to love. We might never get a warm feeling of affection for people who are nasty to us, but that doesn't stop us from being able to love them. We can do good to them, bless them, and we can always pray for them. In 1 Peter 2:23, we get some insight as to how Jesus was able to love his enemies. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. In the Psalms, for this lesson, we started to see the great source of pain, confusion, and frustration that faces those of us who are living in God's kingdom. Bad people always seem to get away with doing bad things, and we often suffer with no apparent reward. Injustice is everywhere, and it often feels like God is silent. The Psalms we read in this lesson were filled with cries for justice and restoration, for the brokenness of the world to be put right. Many of us have cried for that too. Injustice is amongst the biggest and most troubling problems in life, and it was for Jesus too. And the answer to this painful problem is found in Psalm 9:7-8. The Lord reigns forever. He has established his throne for judgment. He rules the world in righteousness and judges the peoples with equity. Again and again throughout the Psalms, the psalmists are reassured that God is not blind to injustice, but will one day hold everyone to account. No evil, abuse, or cruelty will be ignored. God will bring justice in absolute fairness. This was a great source of comfort to the psalmist, and it is how Jesus was able to endure persecution and death without retaliating. He entrusted himself to him who judges justly. Knowing that God will one day deal with all injustice and evil in the world helps us to put our personal suffering in perspective too. This life is not the end. There will be a reward for obedience and trust in God. It frees us to be able to love and pray for those who hurt us, even our enemies. While the people of this world belong to an enemy kingdom, the Bible teaches us that the grace of Jesus is able to save and transform even the most wicked sinner this world can produce. That means that every human being that we meet is in need of our earnest prayers and the example of Christ that we bring. It is not our job to bring judgment. God has asked us to be fellow workers in his rescue mission, like he is reaching out to others through us. In a world that lives like God doesn't exist, we are the light that reveals the truth and invites others to join us in worship of him. Knowing both God's judgment and his saving mercy, we can live with assurance and peace. Our contentment in God is a more powerful witness than we probably realize in our families and communities. And that is something we're going to spend some more time thinking about together in Lesson 4.